Okay. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us, whether you're in person or on the Swather Sports Network. We're glad to have you this evening. Just a couple of things very quickly. We're going to jump right in because we've had a lot of these meetings and they've tended to go pretty long. So we want to jump right in this evening and share information with you. But just a couple of things as we get started. In the past, as we've shared information, we've taken questions as we've gone along. I think tonight what we're going to do is save questions till the end. We want to share specific information about each building this evening. So you're going to hear staff from the elementary school, the middle school, and high school talk about back-to-school plans from the building perspective this evening. And if you're online, if you're live streaming, use the comment section to ask questions. And Darla Smith, our curriculum director, is our moderator on the Swather Sports Network this evening. And she's going to register those questions, and then we'll ask those out loud at the end of our session this evening. So you're going to hear from all the schools. Go ahead and ask your questions as they come up, and then we'll go through those at the end. So with that being said, we're going to have our elementary staff, and Mrs. Crable, I'll let you introduce your folks.
Hi everyone, I'm Elisa Crable. I am the principal at Heston Elementary, and we have with us this evening Dawn Lafferty, who is our school counselor, and Lisa Schmidt, who is our literacy specialist, and she also serves as our Title I coordinator. What I just want to start off with by saying is how excited we are to see students in our building. We are just really looking forward to seeing those little people again. Teachers have been working really hard to prepare for students, and you will be seeing some welcome videos coming out tomorrow and on Monday to welcome students to classrooms and to take a quick peek at what it really looks like in classrooms. I will also let you know that there have been some changes and procedure practices that we are modifying to help us really practice those fundamental safety precautions and protocols, and so tonight I'd really like to go through that, and if you have questions in specific related to those, we can address that, and then as we go along we'd address others. So first of all, we're going to start with our arrival time. Students, we're going to really encourage families to drop off really close to 7:40 instead of earlier. We do know that if you are eating breakfast that you can come as early as 7:33. That's kind of a funny number, but that's how it works for us. And we ask that students are not going to be able to be walked into the school building with parents. We say that students will meet us at the door and then we'll walk them in. And I know that's a little scary when we have little people who are used to that, having parents walk them to the classroom, but I assure you we will have staff there ready to support. Mrs. Lafferty, Mrs. Schmidt will be there to help students get to the right locations. When we have kindergartners, that's really hard for moms and dads to send them off and not walk them in, but we will have our kindergarten teachers meeting students outside the building. So they'll be looking for their classroom teacher and connecting outside, and then they'll take them in. And that will be during our half-day sessions. Grades 1 and 2, if you have students in those two grades, we are asking that you use the east parking lot, and that's the new parking lot, and those students will be entering in the 1-2 Commons door. So that will feel a little bit differently, but the idea is that we are trying to reduce the number of children coming through one door at a time. So the east parking lot and the 1-2 Commons door. When they arrive there, they will have their temperatures taken, and then they will go either to breakfast or right to their classroom. Therefore, it's really important not to come super duper early in the mornings. Kindergarten, grades 3 and 4 will be using the front drop-off lanes and then entering the front doors, and again having temperatures taken, and then going directly to their classroom. If you have siblings that are in different grade levels, that one should be dropped off at the front and one should be dropped off at the east door, we ask that you use the make your decision based on the youngest of those children, so it's probably the closest for them to walk. Another thing that lots of parents have been asking, it relates to, will my child have to wear a mask? And the answer is yes. Will be wearing a mask throughout the entire day. However, we have really been working hard to build in mask breaks at times. They will also not be wearing their mask during PE or at recess time. We do encourage, we all know little people, and they will need more than one mask in a day. So we do ask that you put a few extras maybe in your backpacks so that they can have one if they are something happened and it's all dirty. We also will have available ones in the office or in their classrooms. So dismissal has also changed with the idea that we are trying to spread out our students. So our students on the bus will dismiss from classrooms at 3:05 and then work to board buses at that time. That's a pretty normal procedure at our building. As soon as bus students are loaded, they'll be on their way to pick up students at other buildings. So that should feel similar. Students on the buses will be required to wear masks as well, and they'll be sitting with family groups. At 3:10, our grade 1 will be dismissed, and they'll be exiting out the 1-2 commons door, the one that they came in the morning. And kindergarten and grades 3 will be exiting the front doors. At 3:15, second grade will come out the 1-2 commons door, again where they came in, and grade 4 will come out the front doors. We do ask parents to remain in their cars instead of waiting out front to gather their child and then walking to their cars. Again, to practice social distancing and to just keep everybody safe. We feel it's really important. Teachers will be walking students out. They won't just be coming out in a big rush like they often have in years past. So the intent will be for parents to stay in their cars, and then students will meet their parent at the car. We do a pretty good job of connecting after a few short weeks of what you drive and your child and getting him to the right location. I will also say it is really encouraged if you have it, especially if you have older children, to make a plan of where you could meet for a pickup. We have some options close by to the elementary that would allow for walking and not be too far. For example, on Weaver Street, that could be an easy walk and a pickup place. They could also have a pickup place at the swimming pool. I think that parking lot really is conducive to getting students across the street with a crossing guard and then to their location if you would rather not wait in the long line. That sometimes happens at the front, and we anticipate a longer line at the east parking lot as well. I talked a little bit about math. Oh, I think that's middle school. Sorry, Greg. Okay, there we go. Lunches and recess. We have worked really hard to create, again, a schedule that will allow us to have social distancing and working with grouping our students in teams or cohort groups. So we have modified our lunch and recess schedules to have one grade level eating at a time, and then another grade level outside for recess, so that we have moved from a 3-period lunch plan to 5. So each grade level will have its own lunch period and recess time. With, again, hopes to keep students spread out, be able to supervise them in an efficient way, and still be able to have those experiences, because we all know that being outside will be important for them. Another change that we need to note probably relates to visitors, and I'm not sure if the middle school and high school have as many visitors in a day as that we do at the elementary, but we have a lot, and we do have to limit that this year, at least as we start, to only the office area, and we would ask that you would make an appointment either through Mrs. Stoppel or Mrs. McAllister or myself, and then we will meet you at a specific time. IEPs will continue as with contact from the teacher as well as care teams. Those things will continue to happen. They may be more limited on the number of people attending those. We will also ask that we don't have lunchroom visitors, and I know that's a hard thing to give up, and kids really like that. But in order for us to really just keep the contact tracing down, we feel like it's important to eliminate that this year, at least for the time being. Birthday parties, that's been another question that we've had lots of questions about. They will occur. You're welcome to bring treats like you typically do. We ask that they would be individually packaged and instead of something that would need to be served. However, those will need to be dropped off or brought to the office, and then they will be taken to the classroom. So there won't be visitors in classrooms for that as well. At this time, I think we have a fairly strong plan in regards to keeping your children safe. Teachers have worked tirelessly to create schedules on hand washing, spreading children out, and really making teams stick together so that if there would happen to be a problem, that we could easily connect who they've been with and who they've spent the most time with. So our classrooms will look a little different. There won't be team groupings like you would normally see, or desks together in table groups. You will see rows, but teachers have worked, again, really hard and carefully at how to seat children to maximize instruction and learning. Anything else, ladies, that you would like to share or add to what I had discussed? Okay. Okay, Mr. Heinrichs, I think you're up.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Greg Heinrichs. I'm the principal of the middle school, and to my right is Jill Taves, counselor extraordinaire, and Dave Woodward, 8th grade math teacher, and just all-around good guy. Right, Dave? You know, in following the elementary school, first of all, I think you're going to hear some similar things that are going to be happening at the middle school, but just good luck, elementary school. We're always the recipients of your hard work, or we're the first recipients of your hard work, so that's awesome. And you guys, that's going to be a great time down there. So Mrs. Crable just talked about the excitement that is happening at the elementary school among staff, and I would echo that too, and I just don't know, I'm going to use that word too. We're just excited. I think if you are an educator, mid-July or end of July, your internal clock just starts going, and it's like, it's time for school to start. And so we're way overdue on that. But there's also a difference this year, and I mean, it's just everything that's come into this, it has added to the anticipation and the excitement. It's just tenfold, so we're ready to go. We actually had our first district event, was a middle school event. They played a soccer game tonight, and that was awesome. It's going to be even better when we get kids into the building and we can just say, okay, now we're really back. So we are also really excited. So we're going to kind of walk through a few things. Again, I think you're going to hear some similarities with what Mrs. Crable shared at the elementary school. I'll start with masks. I think in my mind, I just want to keep that really simple. When students and staff are inside of our building, we're just going to be wearing masks, except for when we're eating breakfast, when we're at the cafeteria and eating lunch. Kids are obviously going to have water bottles. I assume that there might be a middle school student who tries to drink from a water bottle through a mask. That's just what middle school kids do sometimes, but obviously we wouldn't do that. And our teachers are going to be really good about taking mask breaks and getting outside every once in a while too. So masks are kind of the name of the game for sure on that one. Social distancing, we're going to have in our classrooms separated desks. You know, that's very atypical for a Heston classroom, but our desks are all separated, and we're working hard and in just the schedule that we have to only have one grade when it's possible, one grade in the hallway at a time, and we've staggered certain things. We also have 2 cafeterias now, so if you're kind of familiar with the setup of the middle school, you know that 5th and 6th grade would eat together in our cafeteria, and then 7th and 8th grade would have a second lunch period. We've turned the stage, we've kind of closed that curtain and turned the stage into a second cafeteria, and we'll have one grade eating up on the stage and one grade eating in the cafeteria. Just all sorts of things like that, just to keep people spread out and separated as much as possible. And then the last one, kind of what we're calling just fundamentals of the way that we want to do things, is just personal hygiene. I think we've just kind of settled at the middle school on every time you walk into a class, you're going to either be given an opportunity to wash your hands or a shot of hand sanitizer, and we'll get right into learning and things like that. So that's just going to be kind of a regular part of our day. So those are kind of the basics, and now it's going to get, I'm just going to give you a lot of information here. On Monday night, our Board of Education voted on starting in a yellow zone, and I won't go into the details of that, but for the middle school, that means some really significant changes. And we're going to be in what is known as a hybrid learning environment. Purpose of a hybrid learning environment is just to spread students out even more than maybe what we would have done, or put them in bigger spaces. And so at the middle school, that's tricky, because even though we do have a few big spaces, we probably just don't have enough big spaces to really do that in the way that we'd like to. And so we got really creative a couple of weeks ago and came up with the idea of pursuing an off-site location. And we looked at some churches, and they were great, and I think we could have made those work. But the off-site facility that we settled on, just because it provided the most space, was Crosswinds Conference Center, just east of town. Probably some of you are familiar with that. So let me just kind of walk you through kind of what that's going to look like, but know that we're going to have some students attending school off-site. So all of our students, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, are going to start their day at Heston Middle School with RS. That's the typical way that we always do that. Our RS groups are already small, so we felt really comfortable in just being able to do that in a typical way. 12, 13, 14 students in a group seemed really good for that, and that's what we have this year. After RS, this is when 5th and 6th graders are going to stay at the middle school, but their day is going to look a little bit different in where they're going to be, and then I'll talk about 7th and 8th grade at Crosswinds after that. So for 5th and 6th grade, they are going to have one of their core subjects, so that'd be English Language Arts, Math, Science, or Social Studies. They'll have one of those. Then they're going to start their encore rotations. That's a lot different than their typical schedule, and probably the biggest reason why that schedule just looks different is because we have a few teachers who work at the high school and the middle school. And so I know Mr. Rhodes here in a little bit after us will speak to the high school schedule. We had to really coordinate with the high school schedule, and there's a little giving and taking, and Mr. Rhodes and I arm wrestle, and sometimes I win and sometimes he wins, but we always get to a good solution on that one. So the encore 3 classes for 5th grade will be right before lunch, and lunch and recess, and then they'll finish up their day in the afternoon with the other 2 core classes. So they'll take all the same number of classes, core and encore, that they would have, just in a little bit different order. For 7th and 8th grade, it gets even, just hang in there with me, 7th and 8th grade gets a little bit different right here. So they're going to start again at the middle school with RS, and then after RS finishes, we're going to load all of our 7th and 8th graders on buses. We will transport them out to Crosswinds, and they're going to start their day. If you're familiar with that site, you know that there are really 2 big buildings on those grounds. The first one is called the Conference Center. It's the one you come into right away. It's got their offices and things like that, and we're going to use that one as well as the Maybe Center, which is kind of on the back part of their property on the very east side. So that first building, the conference center, is primarily going to be where our 8th graders have their classes, and then the Maybe Center, again on the back side of their property, will be primarily where our 7th graders have their core classes. So after RS, buses will take students out to Crosswinds. We'll drop the 8th graders off. We'll take the 7th graders back to the Maybe Center, and they will have enrichment, which is about a 30-minute class right off the bat. Then they're going to have 2 of their core classes. So again, ELA, math, science or social studies. Then they will have lunch, recess, and then they'll come back to their core schedule for their last one. So they'll get the same 3 core classes that they would have gotten. Then to finish their day, they're going to go to 2 encore classes. Now that's different than a typical schedule at the middle school. So let me kind of help you understand kind of why we arrived at that solution, I guess. Again, trying to work with the high school schedule, there's some give and take in that, and to get our shared staff all at the same place at the same time. And there was just not quite enough time to have all 3 of those teachers that we need, as well as our other encore teachers. Not quite enough time to have 3 full encore classes. So we settled on 2 of those, but your students are still going to be enrolled in 3. They're just going to go to 2 of them each day. So they'll go to encore 1 and 2 on the first day, then 2 and 3 the next day, 3 and 1, so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of a sacrifice there. That's the only way we could make that work. The other part that kind of played into that is just building in a little bit of time to get students back to the middle school. We're going to load up our 7th and 8th graders at Crosswinds at 2:55 is our hope to be pulling out of there. And then we're going to bring them back to the middle school at 3:05. That gives our bus students time to get off and our buses to get to the elementary school in time for the elementary school students to get to that part. I guess I should, yep. I kind of skipped ahead there and I was going too fast. So that's kind of the day at Crosswinds, a lot different than what we're used to, but we've spent, well, I guess last week we started kind of visiting that place and figuring out kind of how things would look. Teachers have classrooms. Today we spent most of our day moving just stuff out to Crosswinds and organizing tables and chairs. And it's been a lot of work, but we are really, really excited about just a really unique opportunity to be out there. Again, if you've never been out there, I don't know that I was really familiar with that facility, but it is a jewel and just a really, really neat place. It was pretty hot today, but it's just a beautiful place. Grounds to do whatever we'd like to do. So kids are going to be outside. There's going to be times where they're going to be walking from building to building, and we are really, really, again, just excited. We think it'll be a really neat opportunity. We've kind of joked maybe internally, you know, this will be a really cool memory for our 7th and 8th graders, and we hope like when they come back for their 10th anniversary, you know, graduation anniversary, like they're gonna remember their 7th grade year or their 8th grade year, because it's just gonna be just, I don't know, it's just gonna be really fun out there. And I've had a chance to talk to a few students already, and it's fun because I think they are really anticipating having fun too. We had a few 8th grade boys help us today just move some of that furniture, and they were kind of grooving when they were out there. So it was just kind of fun to see there. So I think that'll be a really neat experience. So just to finish up here, just a few things. I've had a lot of people ask, what can I do to help? Which, man, just that question is awesome. And I just have been asked that a lot lately. So here are my answers to that. If you can, if it's possible for you, if you can drop your student off at the middle school after 7:40, that would really be nice. Mrs. Crable spoke to the same thing, and I think for the same reasons. It will just help us spread kids out a little bit more. So if you can wait till 7:40, which is when breakfast starts at the elementary school, that would be awesome. we're going to have our students go directly to their RS classrooms in the morning instead of waiting in the gym or the cafeteria like they've done in past years. But 7:40 is kind of a magical time. If you can do that, we would really appreciate it. If you can send a packed lunch with your student this year, if you could consider doing that, that'd be great. We're going to provide lunch just like we always do, but we have some just increased demands on our food service people trying to get lunches out to Crosswinds, and we'll make that work and it'll be great. But every lunch that they don't have to prepare makes their job just a little bit easier. So if that's something you can do and you consider doing that, that would be really helpful. Send a full water bottle with your student, especially when you're going to Crosswinds. They have just a few places where we can fill up, and we're going to add some coolers out there. So we'll make sure there's plenty of water, but if they can start the day with a full one, that's just one less thing that we have to worry about. Today I sent, well, if you're a middle school parent, you got a gigantic email with just lots and lots and lots of information. Some of the things that are in those pages that I sent you, I spoke to right now. But if you just take a few minutes and go through that, some of the information in there is a little bit more detailed, but I think that would be really helpful. And then the last thing that I'm going to ask that you just think about is we have a few teachers who are, again, going to be teaching out at Crosswinds, and rather than buy double supplies for the middle school and out at Crosswinds, I think they're probably, after the school year starts, going to send an email and just say, hey, could you send some colored pencils so we could have some out there as well as at the middle school, just as an example. Colored pencils. I think Mrs. Rhodes, who our art teacher, is probably going to have some requests of those things, as well as Mrs. Mowry, our engineering teacher. And if you could just think about doing that, that would be fantastic. I want to put a plug in for just upcoming events. RS lists are going to be posted Friday afternoon. That is, I always think that's the social event of the year. It seems to be. It's a really popular place to come and take a picture. So Friday afternoon, we'll post those on the front doors of the middle school. We want to get our students into school the day before school officially starts and meet with their grade level teachers as well as their RS. I sent you some information in that email with the exact schedule about that. Not a mandatory thing, but if your student's available, we'd love to see them that day before school starts. We have our swim party on the first Friday of the school year. So next week, Friday, there's a home football game that evening. What better way to get ready for the home football game? Jump in the pool real quick. And then don't forget about our open house. We're going to do that Monday, September 14th. Again, there's more information in that email that I sent you. We're going to do that virtually, so that'll be a lot different as well. I will be giving, probably on all of those events, you will get some separate information, because I know I just gave you way too much today. So we'll start to kind of just give you some isolated information on some of those things too. I think that'll make it a little bit easier, maybe the day or two before. We'll do our best to get that out to you. So thank you very much. I'm going to end with where I started, just saying we are super, super excited to get the year going. So Mr. Rhodes, I'll give it to you.
Okay, well, thanks for tuning in or showing up this evening. I just have a few topics that I will hit. Did send out some information yesterday in a message to families that involved just maybe some specifics and follow-up information to the information that Mr. Proctor sent out earlier in the week too. And we will be sending out more detailed information as we go along as well. A big change for us right now is schedule in our hybrid mode. So as long as we are in a yellow or orange zone, we will be using our hybrid schedule with that. Okay, and
if you have paid attention to education in schools in Kansas, you will have seen a lot of different models being used for high schools right now, okay? A lot of those might be 2 days a week, every other day. Those would be some pretty typical things that we're seeing in the area, all right? And our premise for our schedule is that we want every student to come to school every day, okay? Every student every day coming to school, okay? Now, with that, the sacrifice is when they are here, they're only here part of the day, all right? But the advantage that that gives us when every kid comes every day is we remain in contact with students. When we went through the spring last year, what we found is the further we got away from kids, the tougher it was to keep them with us. And we want to avoid that at all costs this year, okay? So every student every day. That also gives us the opportunity when they come every day for those that depend on a meal, a lunch meal, to very easily distribute that to our kids as well, all right? So while an individual teacher won't see every one of their students every day, we as a staff will be in connection with kids every day, all right? So that was an important part of that. And as Mr. Heinrichs mentioned, we kind of had to work through a lot of different kind of scenarios with that, particularly with shared staff. That's what creates challenges. Our schedule, by nature, a 7-period day is very different than theirs, which is a cluster of core classes and then a cluster of encore classes. So that's a challenge to work through. Had a few different models of that were laid out, and then we just had to work through what's gonna work the best for having our staff in both buildings with that too. So if you see a Mr. Lafferty or a Mr. Graverson or a Mrs. Toll, who's our new choir director, give them a pat on the back because they're going to be doing some moving around this year as well. They're going to do that more than they have in other years as well. So certainly some challenges for us in how we kind of administer some things for us this year. But we will use what we'll call a red day and a black day. This would not be very different than what we do on a Wednesday and Thursday schedule in a typical year. In our typical schedule. So our red day will be our odd classes, 1, 3, 5, and 7. We have a morning group that will come in at 8 o'clock, stay till 11:26. We'll serve lunch. The afternoon group comes in at 11:59. And we repeat 1, 3, 5, 7 until 3:25. We did add 5 minutes to our day to add a little extra time since we cut our school year off. We needed to add a little bit of time for cushion for snow days and to meet our 1,116-hour requirement for the state, okay? The black day then will include LS, and crew to start the day, and then hours 2, 4, and 6, okay? And that would be typical, again, of our block schedule in a normal year as well. So again, we'll have a morning group come in, we'll serve lunch, afternoon group comes in, and teachers repeat that same schedule with the students in the afternoon, okay? There'll certainly be some quirks that we have to work through on that. I know right now on that it doesn't give great detail to, if you look where it says LS and crew on a black day, it just simply has a bulk amount of time of 8 to 8:50. That is an update that we will send out. We kind of worked through some details on that, of what's going to be the appropriate amount of time. LS stands for learning support. Many students at the high school level just think it means L and S, and I come maybe a little bit later, late start. That's not what it is. It's actually learning support. So in that time, if they're required to be there, a teacher has requested them to come in. That's required attendance time, and they have to be there. We mark attendance for that. That will actually go from 8, I believe, from 8 to 8:27, and then our crew will be 8:30 to 8:50. So crew will only be every other day as well. That has been the last couple of years an everyday event for us, but we've got to change that in this scenario as well. Okay, going to just go through a few maybe anticipated questions on this. So instead of having a bullet point list here, I wrote questions to myself to keep me on track here. So we posted those morning and afternoon student groups earlier this week out on the windows, and you might have seen those when you walked in as well, for those of you that are in attendance. And so as soon as we sent that message out, I would say within 3 minutes of that message going out, there were students outside the windows out there checking those. So hopefully for them that was a little nostalgic, like going to find your RS teacher or your second grade teacher or your third grade teacher and showing up and being excited about that. But I know some were maybe happier than others on which group they were in as well, and I can understand that. I can tell you, in order to get that accomplished, our goal with that had to be, we got to reduce numbers in our building, total numbers in our building, but then also it can't just be total numbers in our building. We got to look from classroom to classroom as well, okay? And in a 7-period day, now you're talking about that gets complicated because many of the classes are mixed grade levels too, all right? So where they are sitting right now with morning and afternoon is, I'm not saying there might not be something that changes, but I know I'm going to get questions on that, and the answer is going to be, no, we can't change it, just to be real upfront on that, okay? It's very complex in making sure that we get classes divided out fairly evenly on that, okay? I do know I made a boo-boo or two on there, and we're working to correct that with particular kids for some class needs with that, but that's where it's going to sit. And I know there's some inconveniences with that. Transportation-wise, it's not as convenient. Maybe you prefer your child to get up really early in the morning and not give them the opportunity to sleep in, or vice versa. So I know there's definitely challenges, but again, our premise with that is we want every kid to come to school every day, and that's the way that we can accomplish that. Okay, any other model with that, we're losing that touch. Okay, so there's my answer to my first question, I suppose. How does this schedule reduce large gatherings and groupings of students? So some things that aren't in that schedule right now, typically we would have something called break between second and third hours, and that's just an open time where students have just a chance to just kind of hang out in the halls and the commons area and the locker bay areas. We've taken that out of the schedule in our hybrid model for a couple of reasons. Number one, we need the instructional time. Number two, that just encourages a large group of people to stand around together in those moments too. So we've even taken that out of, if we go back into the green and we're all here on site, there'll be a stretch of time where we don't have that in there in our regular schedule as well. The other part of that is going to be, and I'll kind of touch on the next a couple questions down, arrival and exit expectations with that. Much like the other buildings, we need kids to get here a little bit later. Okay, it always shocks me with high school kids. Well, you pretty much about 3 weeks into it, you know who gets there at exact what time. You know who's going to get there at 7:40, and you know who's going to get there at 7:59 and 59 seconds before the 8 o'clock bell, right? And it's just like, it's clockwork. You can bet on it every day. We're going to need kids to probably come a little bit later. If they're the kids who have been coming to hang out, and I can tell you every year, the freshman class, they get there pretty early, and in the freshman locker bay back in there, they are sitting hip to hip in that locker bay, and you got to like crawl over them to get through there to get to the classrooms. And normally that's great. They're just wanting to talk and hang out with each other. That's a thing that we got to avoid. We actually have gates that close off our academic area back there, and normally we open those at 7:30. We won't open those until at least 7:45 this year, so students won't be able to have access to their classroom spaces yet. And I would prefer, unless they need to get dropped off or a bus kid, if they need to get dropped off or a bus kid, we're going to let them in the building and they'll have access to the seating out here in the commons area. But for others, we really need them to come after 7:45, and that's something I'll send out in message as well. And then we'll have the gates open, but we'll ask them when they come, we'll ask them to go to their first hour or crew or LS, whatever the appropriate place is at that time, to go to those spaces, okay, and be ready to go for class instead of hanging out. Okay, and that'll be a change for our kids because they like their kids and they want to hang out with their friends, right? So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for us. We'll have to work through some of those things, okay? How will masks be handled? I've had a lot of questions about this. You know, the executive order is that we will wear them in classroom spaces. So it doesn't matter if it's 20 kids in a class or 3 kids in a fairly big class. The order is we wear those in class, so we'll wear those in class. And that's staff and students with that. Okay? The thing that's going to be really important, and I've encouraged of our staff, is be really willing to take kids outside or to a larger space where you can take a mask break. Okay? Now, kids are only going to be here 3.5 hours instead of 6.5 or 7 hours. Okay, so maybe that eliminates a little bit of the challenge, but still, I think a lot of folks can recognize when you've had a mask on for a while that it feels good to take that off and breathe some fresh air a little bit too. So we've talked about the spaces that we can use. Teachers can go down to the main gym, spread kids out, let them take their mask off, certainly going outside, and we've got some better access to some spaces outside as well right now with some work that's going on around the building. So we want that to occur as well. The other thing with masks are passing periods. For us, passing periods will look a little bit different than it would in other classes. That's a time where a lot of people are going to be out in the hallways. By rule, that is not close contact by definition of that, but we're still going to require masks in the hallways because we're going to get a lot of people. You know, there's about a 30-second stretch of time in a couple of spots back in the academic area where it gets pretty clustered with folks. Now, with only half the people here at a time, you know, we're not a 3A school anymore. We're going to be like a 1A school, you know, in the space that we have there. So that's not going to have the same feel to it, but they'll have to have masks on during the passing periods as well, okay? But again, we want to give them plenty of chances and our teachers plenty of chances to take those off. I know there's going to be questions about lunch. I have received some emails from folks about lunch. We only have one lunch period. Normally we have 2 lunch periods in order to get everybody fed in the space that we have. So I've used the term grab and go style for lunch. I don't know if that's the right word in the food industry or not. But our morning kids are going to get done with class at 11:26. There will be a line for them to be able to go through. It will be bagged, boxed, something like that. They'll be able to go through, but what we're going to ask of them is when they get their lunch, they're going to leave the building. Okay, and they don't have to, kids don't have to take our lunch either, just like they wouldn't at any other time. So I'm anticipating we'll have a lot of kids at 11:26. Instead of wanting to get the school lunch, they might just leave and go home and eat lunch too, just fine. Okay, but if they take our lunch, the kids that are done at that time, we're going to ask them to go ahead and leave. Okay, kids that are in the afternoon group, if they want to eat lunch, they need to get here at the start of that lunchtime. Again, this is information we will send out also. But if they want to eat lunch, they need to be here by the start of that lunchtime, okay? And we will have a different spot to serve them from. We will have the seating available in the commons area. For those of you who have been through the building or noticed in the commons area, we've reduced the amount of seating in there to spread people out a little bit in that space. But kids would have to get here at the start of that if they're going to take the school lunch. The bell will ring. They will go on then and do hours 1, 3, 5, 7 or 2, 4, 6 or whichever day it is, okay? We will have to, a change for us is that we're going to have to inform our kitchen staff of how many people are going to be eating, because this is going to be very different, and they're going to have a hard time judging how much food to make, and we can't waste a bunch of it. So kids are going to have a form. Vanessa has it all ready to go. She's just got to work with our kitchen staff a little bit more, a form for them to click on and say, do they want the meal or not? Okay, and that would be true for us as a staff too, because our kitchen folks have to know how much food to prepare. Okay, so that's going to be something different. We're going to probably have to work through some bugs with that one. Okay. What are teachers doing to prepare right now? I've had some people ask me questions about classes. Usually people ask kind of about the logistical stuff. A few people have asked me questions about our teachers and our classes. The first thing that they're doing to prepare is just working really hard at getting ready for classes to start. I've been really proud of our staff. They are trying to figure out, we're going to have kids, our instructional time in a 2-week period goes from 460 minutes in a 2-week period per class to about 250 minutes, give or take a few minutes in there. Okay, so it didn't get cut in half, but really darn close to cut in half. Okay, so they're working really hard on how we're going to maximize that time with kids when they're here with us. And then what do we need to ask of them when they leave? They're only going to be here half a day. By rule, we should be providing 6.5 hours of education. Okay, now it's impossible to actually calibrate that with every kid when they leave our building. That's absolutely impossible. Okay, but our teachers have to be thoughtful in what's the work we need them to do outside of class to be prepared to come back the next time. So I would imagine there's going to be a lot of kids, and it's going to vary from class to class. It might see a little uptick in expectation of time outside of class because they're here so much less. Okay, so don't be shocked if that's the case this year. That probably should be the case for many of our kids. Okay, but our teachers they're working to get that figured out. They're working through everything that is unknown. They're working through everything that changes on a daily basis. They're trying to figure out how to best serve the kids in their classes. They're trying to help each other learn things. We've done that a couple days. I just get out of the way. They help each other learn some things. They're trying to figure out the best model to deliver information and instruction to kids, and then just figure out how to use our time the very best when they come here. That's what we really want to focus on, is how we use that time. With the students only attending, I just touched on that one. I already answered my own question. With students only attending a half day, how much work should they expect outside of class? Again, by rule, it should be 6.5. Whether you're remote, on-site, we're in hybrid, whatever, it should be 6.5 hours. Really hard to track that, really hard to calibrate that, but kids should expect to have more outside of class. Okay. I also have here, just for information, after Mr. Proctor speaks, Mr. Stoppel is here in the back. Mrs. Hebert is here in the back too from the guidance office, and Mr. Stoppel from the activities office. So if you have questions that are directed towards high school, I can respond to those. Activities, Mr. Stoppel can respond to those. Anything with the guidance office, Mrs. Hebert can respond to those tonight. Okay, thank you.
Okay. always been very proud to work in Heston and to work with the staff that we have here and just the community. And what I would say over the past several weeks, especially since we brought people back on campus, I've just been amazed. Mr. Rhodes mentioned it, and every single building. It's just been remarkable to see the way the staff has worked to prepare for the school year, but also the way the community has come together in a time that's different than any we've experienced before. And we'll talk a little bit about, as we get into why we're talking about changes in our day, how we're doing things in Heston that are hopefully going to accomplish some of the goals that we have. But it's been amazing to see people at work over the past several weeks and prepare for next week, because we expect kids on Wednesday, on the 2nd. So want to get into very quickly what we're calling our gating criteria. And we sent this out on Tuesday of this week, and it's not unique. It is something that I think most school districts around the state and many counties are using to make determinations about how school will look. And I don't know how well you can see it up on the screen. We had some copies out front, but I'll kind of walk through very quickly what's on the gating criteria, and then also what that gating criteria means in terms of how school will look, how we make determinations based on numbers that are constantly changing, and what if you have inconsistencies, because we're finding that to a degree on different types of criteria that we're choosing to use, what happens when they're kind of all over the place. And so we'll describe kind of our philosophy behind how we make these decisions as well. So very, very quickly, I just want to walk through, and if you're watching or streaming online, this is found in our back to school plan. I think it's pages 8 and 9. There's also, I believe, a link on the page that you're viewing that you can scroll through and find this gating criteria as well. It's also posted on our website, and we'll talk about how we house information on our website in just a minute as well. So a lot of places to find it. And I will also say that this is where we're starting, and we've worked really hard with our county health department, who I continue to say has just been amazing to work with. But they have helped us put together this criteria and tailored it for us, because there's a lot of examples that we looked at from other counties and other school districts to what KSD, the Kansas State Department of Education, along with KDHE put out. We used a lot of that guidance and then tailored it with working through the county health department to make it fit for what our goals are. So just very quickly, the gating criteria is on the left side, and the first number we're using is positivity rate. And as we look at positivity rate in Harvey County, and our county has elected to use county numbers. So there are examples of school districts that are using zip code-based data, but in Harvey County, we've been told we need to use county metrics. And positivity rate, if you go to the Harvey County dashboard, if you Google Harvey County dashboard, or there are links on our back to school plan at the bottom of this page on the gating criteria, not only to the Harvey County dashboard, but also to the KHDE metrics, or KDHE, I'm sorry, and they've got a new tab on that page that deals directly with school metrics, school gating criteria. So you can see Harvey County data in two different places, and they look different. The numbers are consistent, but the way they show the numbers can look a little bit different, so it's good to go to both places. But on that dashboard, one of the first things that you'll see is that 2-week positivity rate. And we've got some thresholds there based on that color-coded system that we're using. And today, I can tell you that the number is 12.5% on positivity rate in Harvey County. But I can also tell you that in the last 7 days, it's about 7%, and the 7 days before that, it was about 17%. That's a pretty big discrepancy, and it's settled in at about 12.5%. And we're going to see potentially, if we stay consistent as we have the last week, we're going to see some of those larger numbers of positive days go off the list, and hopefully start to see more smaller numbers of positive tests continue the next several days. So it's important to look at that number over time because it does fluctuate quite a bit. When we looked at it on Friday, it was about 9.4%. We've seen it in the 8 range. And 12.5 is pretty high. That's been one of the higher numbers that we've seen on positivity rate. But that's one indicator that we're using. The second one will kind of kick in as we get into school, and that's absenteeism. So we're looking at, from both a student and staff perspective, how many people are missing school due to what we would consider potentially a COVID-related reason. That could be some type of symptoms that we know are on the list of primary symptoms for COVID. It could also mean that we're missing because we're considered a close contact and we have to quarantine, or anything that would be a rule that we're working to follow based on CDC guidelines and local county health guidelines as well. So we're looking at absenteeism, and you can see the different thresholds on that as well. The third criteria is trends in the county, evaluated every 2 weeks, and we're going to look at every other Friday. And what that is, we're going to take numbers over from one Friday and look at the previous 2 weeks, and we're going to see how many total positive cases did we have in that time frame, and then we're going to compare that to the prior 2 weeks and see, are we trending up, are we trending down, are we staying steady? And so that number is provided on a graph or a chart on the dashboard. The fourth metric is active cases. And that one is just right there for everybody to see. That's an easy one to look at. We're going to evaluate that each week and see how we're doing. We've gone in the past week, not even full week, from 52 active cases. Today, Mr. Rhodes, am I right, was it 16? Something like that. So that's another number that we can see change pretty quickly because people meet recovery criteria, and it depends on the number of positive cases in a given time. So those are the 4 primary criteria areas that we're using, and you can see how those are distributed across that chart based on the different colors. And there's some descriptions below that just kind of explain what we're going to be using or how we're going to be using that data. The next page, and this is also found in the back to school plan, is just a summary of what does each zone mean. So you have a green zone, yellow, which is where we're starting, orange, and red. And you can see how does that impact our learning environment, which is what we just heard our buildings describe. How does it impact activities? What does that mean for coming to events? Mrs. Crable talked a lot about visitor access. What does that mean? We've got some tighter restrictions on things as you go across, based on what those metrics would suggest. Outdoor activities and spaces, how do staff access, and then what do our offices look like? There's a lot more that goes on in schools, but we felt like those are some key areas that might be helpful to see based on where we would be in a particular zone. So you've heard a lot about yellow, and I think it's important to know how do we make that determination? Because if you look at the numbers, if we were to evaluate that decision from last Friday, we would have been in 3 different zones. We could have been in green in absenteeism based on staff numbers, based on the first few weeks here. Okay, at the time on positivity rate, we were in the yellow. And on trends, we're going to have to interpret the trend numbers a little bit, but we saw, I think it was about a -1 over those 2-week comparisons. And then our active case number was actually in the orange. It was 52, and today it would be in the green at 16. So you can see how tough it's going to be, and if we decide that we're going to change every time those numbers change, we're going to be bouncing back and forth a lot. And we don't feel like that's a good thing for our kids or for our staff, especially when we're doing something pretty unique in terms of our hybrid model. But we did feel like the numbers suggested that we probably shouldn't start in green. We talked about that. We felt like yellow was a good place to be based on the numbers, and we feel like we're prepared to start in that yellow learning environment. I spoke with earlier today, it's a wonderful thing when you're in a state where you can call the Commissioner of Education on the phone. I actually left a message for him and he called me back. And I don't know how many states operate that way, but I think that's a really neat thing when we're in a place where we can talk to the head honcho of the Kansas State Department of Education and ask him, what do you think of our plan? So I did. I called him and I asked him, what do you think of our plan? Here's what we're thinking about doing. And he said, I think it's a great plan. I think it's something when you can get kids in school every day and do it in a way that accomplishes some of the strategies that we want to accomplish in terms of safety, I think it's a wonderful thing, but it's extremely unique. He could only think of one other district, and it's a much smaller district than us, that's doing any kind of off-site hybrid model. So we know that we've asked a lot of our staff, and he said, I bet that's a lot harder work. I said, it's a lot harder work for our staff. When we talk about food, just getting food, Becky Mason, our food director, has worked her tail off to try to figure out how we're going to do that. Les Greer, our operations director, has worked his tail off to figure out how are we going to work busing. You know, Mr. Rhodes talked about the high school hybrid half day. That means we're running buses in the morning, midday, and in the afternoon. And you know, I go to them and I say, all right, here's what we're thinking. We want to get kids in school every day. We want to do it safely. I know it's going to be hard. And they say, we'll get it done. You know, and that's been the attitude, and it's hard. It is harder work. It's hard to pack up your classroom and move out to Crosswind. It's a really neat place, but that's a difficult thing to do. So we are asking a lot of our people. We hope that eventually we'll be able to get into green and get all kids on site, but we know that we have to pay attention to the data and make sure that it's safe to do so. If we move to orange, you'll see that if we go back here, it always delays on me. But if we go back, I don't know, Mrs. Crable, I was kind of in and out a little bit, but in the gating criteria, if we go to orange, the elementary school gets impacted in a little different way. We've got the potential in orange for them to go to an off-site hybrid model. And what we've done, and we talked about this at the last meeting, we've reached out to churches, and I will tell you, I think every church in the community said, you can use us. Which is just, again, an unbelievable thing. Because that's a pretty big disruption when you bring a bunch of second graders over to your church during the day, or fourth graders. And so we do have that option. If we need to tighten things up, we can move some kids from the elementary school as well over to an off-site location. So it's a unique plan. It's our plan. We're going to implement that plan, and our people have done a great job preparing for it. Just very quickly, how we're making these determinations. Who is it? Well, there's a lot of us that get together that look at the data, and try to make the best determination. That's what we did in this case to decide yellow's the best option. I talk to the county health department, I mentioned this before, almost daily. If I don't talk to them, I've emailed them, and they're a great resource, and they're a great guide to help us make those decisions. We also have just a small informal advisory group, just people that I contact in our community that are in the healthcare profession that have agreed to just look at the data and offer some wisdom based on what they're seeing. And I think that's extremely helpful. So having a group of people that we can touch base with to say, here's what the data looks like, what do you think? And that's how we're approaching this. As far as how we'll make that determination, again, we're going to have times just like this last week where we're going to be in different zones based on the data and different criteria. And we're going to have to make a determination and interpret that data a little bit. Because even though some of it is right there and we can see it, we also have to look at trends over time as well. So we'll continue to do that. If we're in different zones, we'll make a determination as a team. How does it impact activities? We looked at that a little bit, and you can go through and review all that information based on the different zones. And then the big question is, how often could we change? How often could we shift? There's a lot of districts who are doing a weekly analysis, and then they will make a decision every week as to what the following week will look like. And we've decided that we don't want to do that we want to stay consistent as long as we can. And if the data is starting to trend in a direction, and even if it solidly sets in a given zone, we want to make sure that it's there and it's going to stay there before we transition. Now, what would change that is if something drastic were to occur. If we were to see a large number of cases in our community or in our school district, we may have to move much more quickly, but we see probably 2 weeks of lead time, and we'll start putting people on alert. Right now, if you use active cases, if you use the potential for positivity rate, if you look at cases over time, there's reason to think that we could be moving towards green. Okay, some of those are already in the green. That's where we would like to be. You know, I heard that again today from our commissioner. We want you to be in green. We want kids to be in school if it's safe to do so. But we want to be solidly in green because we don't want to bring the 7th and 8th graders back over to the middle school and then take them back out to crosswind. We want to know for sure that that's the right thing to do, that we've settled in, and look at that over time and give plenty of lead time for parents, for staff, for students before we make that determination. If you were to Google gating criteria and you were to find examples across the state or look at KSDE or KDHE, one of the things that you'll see that's a little bit different in our gating criteria is in the orange zone. On our orange zone, we stay in school. And if you look at KSDE, if you look at some of the larger districts, Wichita as an example, there's probably some even closer than that they go remote at the secondary level when they're in orange. And you'll notice in ours, we stay in a hybrid. We move to a hybrid at the elementary school, but we stay in our hybrid at both the middle school and the high school, and we don't go remote. And we thought a lot about that, and as I was working with our health department on making that determination, again, we feel like it is very important that kids are on site if they can be. And if the county advises us that we need to do something different and we need to go to a remote model, even if those numbers are in orange, we will do so. But we want to err on the side of giving everybody, families, the option of having their students on site. And we want to remind everybody that you also have the option to be a remote learner as well. And we want to make that readily available for anybody who feels like that's the best option for their family. We want to make that easy for you. And we feel like having that choice is very important. But I know that's a question on people's minds. Why is the USD 460 orange zone, why is it different than what we see in many other districts? And that's the reason. And again, if we're advised by public health that we need to make a change, but so far they've said, you have a good plan. It goes back to what these guys talked about with our fundamental practices. We need to employ those fundamental practices. We need to do them well. And we feel like that the strategies we have in place will work very well for us. And we want to make sure that we provide that on-site opportunity because kids need it. And we want to provide it, and we do it really well. So that's one of the differences that you'll see on our gating criteria compared to others. Darla, I'm guessing there's a few questions that we have. We've got a couple other things that we'll talk about at the very end, but I think now, principals, if you guys could come back up, I'm guessing that there's some questions for each of you, I imagine. And anybody in the crowd that has questions, this would be a great time to ask them. And we're going to remember this time that if you're in the audience to repeat the question so that people who are streaming can know what we're actually responding to, which I've done a terrible job of. So, Darla, you want to kick things off? What questions do we have back there?
Right. I'm going to go ahead and ask this one. I think you kind of mentioned it, but it might be nice to repeat this. The question is, some of the districts are using like a 9-week schedule, that they stay on that 9 weeks before they make a change. And then that question that follows up with that, then will the schedule change back to green if we did that? So you might want to just talk about...
Sure. We haven't set any timelines. We feel like we want to stay very flexible and we want to stay consistent. So I know there's a lot of examples of districts that have put specific timelines for different things in place. We haven't done that as of yet. We might have to as we work forward, but for right now, we're going to look at the data over time and we'll make determinations based on the direction that we're heading, and we'll try to give people lead time if we're going to make a change. So we're not locked into anything right now. We feel like yellow is a good place for us to start. We've got some good things in place. We may be there for a little while, but if we start to trend one direction or the other, we'll make a determination based on that.
This next question, or a couple questions, are for the elementary. So the first one is, for parents who are walking or biking, is there a preferred place for them to wait for their students?
This would be the parent walking?
Right.
Okay, we would encourage you probably to walk to the bike rack and drop your child off there, have them park, and then they would walk in, and you could stay at the bike rack and see if they get into the building, and then you'd be on your way.
And then connected to that is if we ever went back to green, could a parent then walk their child to the classroom?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, we would have to visit that along the way. I would think, yes, if we were completely open, we could revisit that.
And then the last question I have here right now printed for you is regarding the temperature checks at the elementary school, and that parents might be gone before the temperatures were taken. So how would they be notified if their child did have a temperature? And then what would be the threshold of that temperature?
Well, we know little bodies probably are running if they're walking to school. Instead of walking, they'll be running. And so we will take the temperature. If it is above 100, we will take it again. And then if it still continues to be high, over 100, then we will send them to the office and they'll be notified there. We'll have a place in Nurse Tammy's office that they will wait, and then contact will be made to parents.
Okay. The next question is for the middle school. And it has to do with the remote learning piece. And actually, this one could probably go across the board for anybody, but could you just talk a little bit about remote learning and what that would mean?
Yeah, so the question was about remote learning. It sounds like just some general information. Is that right, Darla?
Right.
So I believe at all three buildings there are a handful of students whose parents likely have helped them make decisions and are going to stay home. And we're still going to provide instruction to that. That's one of the reasons that we've kind of been giving our teachers more time this year to prepare, is because we know we're going to have some remote learners to do that. So I'm going to encourage any parent who has told their school that their student is going to be a remote learner to be paying attention to some emails and some communication that's going to come out next week, and I forget what day it is. Okay. I'm not going to steal Mr. Proctor's thunder here. He'll get to it. But we're going to have 2 meetings, Zoom meetings next week, where we will lay out what remote learning looks like for all of those parents, all those students. Do you want to hit that now?
So Darla, who's our moderator tonight, is our curriculum director, and probably the best curriculum director in Kansas. Is that safe to say, Darla? She said yes. No, she wouldn't say that. But she is. She's the best. And we're working to put together a couple. We haven't decided for sure if we're going to do a live meeting or if we're just going to provide kind of an instructional, a list of instructional materials for anybody who's starting remote. And we have some software that we want to show. And this will actually be for all students, but the students who are on site will get this from their teachers. So we're going to provide next week some resources. There'll be a section on our website that speaks specifically to remote learning. So we'll show you a tutorial of how to use the Acellus software. It's an online learning platform that our staff is working through now, and you'll have a tutorial on that Darla will put together for us. There'll also just be some expectations on what remote learning means, and we'll tailor that for each building to talk about kind of the examples of a schedule and those types of things. This has been a challenging area, not only for USD 460, but for schools across the state of Kansas. It's a challenging topic because we know that we should not and cannot expect kids to log in on a computer all day and do classwork. And we can't mimic everything that we do in school in a remote setting, but we're going to give you the very best options that we can as far as remote learning goes. And so a lot of that information will come to you next week, and then we'll have a hotline directly to Darla that you can ask her any questions about remote learning. So Ms. Crable and Mr. Rhodes, you guys want to talk about remote learning anymore? Okay.
If you are a remote learner at the elementary level, I would encourage you to check your email, because there's been a few emails sent from the office related to device checkout. You should also have contact been made with you from a classroom teacher? Because remote students will also have a homeroom teacher assigned to them, and that will be the teacher that will be pushing out assignments and including them in Zoom conversations with their class, and working to build that social connection to the students who might be on site.
I don't know that I have a lot to add on the remote learning. I'm not sure if the question was directed at for those who have chosen it to start the year, or what if we had to go into the red zone and go, whole scale with that. So that there's actually a couple different, angles to that. But
that question is there about transitioning like from remote back to school, or back to school to remote and back and forth. So
yeah, okay. So for us at the high school, Google Classroom is kind of the home base for any digital work for any class, and that's where our teachers will be able to post the work that students need to do. And the Acellus tool that Mr. Proctor mentioned, a web-based tool, that again, our teachers will just be able to post into that Google Classroom what the students have to accomplish that day. So, it's going to be, our teachers are going to do their best to try to mimic what they've done in the classroom space for our remote learners, those who are choosing it to start. If we're going to be realistic, it's impossible to completely mimic everything you've done in a classroom. So if you've ever taken a college course that's very discussion based and you're having discussion in the moment, versus you've taken an online college class that has a chat board and you're supposed to post on that, that's two very different experiences with that too. So we got to be realistic about those types of things. But our teachers have a lot of tools they'll use. Acellus is one of those web-based tools. There's some others that other teachers have already been using with students to be able to push out instruction and content to students as well. And if we had to go all remote, would apply those to many students besides just those that are choosing that to start too.
Maybe just one quick thing to add right there, because I think part of that question, at least the way you worded that, Darla, was the back and forth kind of aspect of that. And as a district, we have, I think, approached this whole idea of remote learning with a lot of flexibility, and just what can we do to meet people's needs. And that seemed like a really good place to start, and we're kind of still in there and feeling pretty good about that. I don't know, just from an educational standpoint, the idea of back and forth, that doesn't seem like it would be really productive for the student. That seems like it would be a disadvantage to the student's education. So I think I'd be leery of the kind of the back and forth. A lot of districts have asked their students to commit, hey, if you're going to say remote, we need you to stay in that environment for 9 weeks or a semester. We haven't done that. And we've said if students want to come back on site, we want that to happen. But I think if it would get into the back and forth, there would probably be some individual conversations just on, are we reaching some educational goals, or are we putting some obstacles in students' way right here, I think is probably how we'd respond to that.
Mr. Rhodes, the next couple questions are for you. One is about a bus to get to the kids to school by 11:26. Is that going to be possible? And the other one is, how is the schedule going to affect the kids who are doing VOTEC in Newton?
Okay, yeah, so many of our bus students are in the morning group, I believe, right now. So whoever asked that question, if you're still on watching us, what would be awesome is if you would shoot me an email also, just let me know your kid's going to be on the bus, so I can speak directly to you with that as well. But that's where we're going to work with Les Gurr, who's our Director of Maintenance and Operations, to coordinate bus times and transportation, and we'll definitely work through that with folks to try to get them here as well. Obviously, that's a challenge of doing the morning and afternoon groups, but we are going to work to accommodate all of those situations too. But again, if the person who asked that question, if you'd like to shoot me an email directly, that would be great too, and we can talk about that a little bit more. Darla, remind me of the second question, please.
The second one was just that bus schedule and then VOTEC classes at Newton. Okay,
yeah, so we just got updated kind of schedule information from Newton. They're starting in a hybrid schedule. Their hybrid schedule is different than our hybrid schedule, so therein lies a challenge also. The way we set it up with morning, afternoon groups, if a student is going, because they're only with us half day, if they're going over to Newton and they're over there for almost 2 hours, they're basically missing all of their class time here. So if their class, let's say it was from 8 to 9:30, they don't end up back over here at 9:45, they missed a bunch of time. They'll go to their Newton class, but they'll be in the afternoon group for us, or vice versa. with that too. So we're going to send that direct information. I cannot list it off the top of my head for each individual class that our kids might be taking over there, but we will touch base directly with those kids and families that are taking a Newton class too, to make sure they really understand, number one, the days they actually go to Newton, the days they don't go to Newton, and what that transportation will look like with them too. Okay, so again, we'll go directly to families with that. Yep.
This next is still for you as well, and it deals with the first day of school being a half day. And so if the students are afternoon students, will they be going to school that day or what? How's that half day going to work?
Yeah, thank you, whoever asked that question, for asking that, because I should have talked about that, and I missed that earlier, so I'm glad that that question was asked. It is originally on the calendar set as a half day, which would have meant in a normal situation, we'd have been going from 8 to 12 with all kids. And then the second half of that is listed as a school improvement day, where we'd have some work with our teachers in the afternoon. So what I've shared with our staff is we're just going to plan to have our morning and afternoon group. So, you know, in a normal year, they would all been coming. We're still going to have them all come. On that day, the schedule is going to look a little bit different. Again, this will be things that we will send out. Vanessa and I have a list of things to get together to push out in a message to folks specific to high school. When they come on that day, it will not be a red or black day. It will be just like a normal half day, where they will come in and do all classes 1 through 7 in the morning. Afternoon group will come in, do all classes 1 through 7. So they're short classes, but the reason we want every kid to come that day is we can get the Chromebooks checked out, and we can talk about all this kind of procedural stuff we need them to know that's different this year, plus the stuff we need them to know just to attend school on a regular year, and get through all that stuff. So then on Thursday of next week, we will start with a red day, and we'll be right into instruction. Then with that, we can take care of a lot of the nuts and bolts on that day. Yeah, so thank you for asking that question.
The next one has to do, if a student has symptoms during the day at school, what's going to kind of be the process for that? And
Call Nurse Tammy. Actually, we're going to have 2 school nurses, at least for the first semester, which will be really nice. Dee Dee Landis is going to join us maybe later this week or early next week, tomorrow. So we want to welcome her, and she's going to there's only ever been one of Nurse Tammy. We've always wished there were more with 3 buildings, but Dee Dee will help us and probably be housed more at the middle school throughout the day, but both can make it to the high school as well. So that's, honestly, I kind of joke, but that will be our first call. And we've got a process in place where we will follow KDHE recommendations on what symptoms are primary symptoms and what constitutes a call home. And I think we've got a pretty good handle on that. Is that accurate, Nurse Tammy? She's shaking her head yes. So.
then the next question really is for the elementary school about, is there some sort of plan to help those younger kids if they're struggling with wearing masks, and how will that work?
Well, we all know that it's a learning process, and the more that you practice with it, the better you get with it. So our teachers are very aware of that and are knowing that mask breaks are important, and to build that in. They are also going to be doing some teaching related to that, why it is important and how you do that. We've put up lots of signage throughout the building in kind of a fun and loving way to help students remind them how to wear the mask appropriately. And I think it'll be learning together. And we also know that we'll guide and direct them if they are not wearing their mask correctly, and do that as kind and gently as we can, but also stressing the importance of them.
You didn't mention this just now in your answer. I think you did in your presentation, but mask breaks are going to be really important, and I think we're all going to do that too, as much for the adults as they are for the kids too.
The next question deals with looking at those gating criteria and about how much warning parents might have before changes are implemented.
So we're going to try to provide as much lead time as possible. Again, we talked about processes that would be similar to some other districts that are looking at that each week and then making a determination about the next week. We really don't see us operating that way. Plenty of lead time is going to be important for all people in our school system. And we want to be solidly in one place or another before we consider moving to that different zone, because it will create disruptions or significant changes in the way we do things. Our goal, what we hope will happen, is we want to move to green. We want kids to come to our school buildings every day, and we want to do the things that we do really well in that environment. That's going to be the ideal environment for our kids, but we want to make sure that it's safe to do so and that we're using good data and good guidance from the experts that we rely on. But I will say, unless something changes drastically where we have to make an immediate adjustment, and we will communicate that, and people need to be aware that that is a possibility. But besides that, if we're just seeing data trending, which is what we usually see, then we're going to start communicating with our staff first, saying that we need to start thinking about a different zone, and we'll communicate with families at that point too when we're ready to start talking about changing into a different zone. So it's not as black and white, which maybe makes it harder, but at the same time, I think it will cause less changes, less disruptions, and more consistency from day to day. If we didn't have the model that we have, where our K-8 kids especially, and our high school kids too, are able to be here every day, that might look different. So I can certainly see why some districts are looking at that week to week. If we had kids in school 2 days a week, then we may want to consider making an adjustment there quicker. But because we're going to see our kids every day, we feel like that our models, the hybrid models that we have in place, are accomplishing a lot of the goals that we want to accomplish. So.
And I think this is the last question here. It's about crosswinds and the other facilities that we're using. How are those arrangements put together, and some of the details about those?
Sure. So I mentioned the churches that we reached out to. We had sent a letter several weeks ago just saying, could this be a possibility? And everybody was extremely receptive. Our staff went and toured 5 churches, I think, in town, and then chose their favorite at some point. No, they just kind of weighed all the different things. All of them had, great things, and we could probably use any one of them and be very grateful to do so. And again, that's for elementary if we move into orange and need to move to an off-site hybrid. And how we would do that, at least early on, is we would move 2nd grade and we would move 4th grade. 2nd grade would alleviate that 1-2 commons, so we can use all that space. 4th grade would alleviate the 3-4 commons, so we can use all that space for the remaining grade level, and then have a whole church to run around in. I think just isolated locations maybe, but anyway, so we've worked with our pastors in town to kind of work through the details, and we're still doing that. We're not going to start there. So it's really important to note that right now in yellow, elementary students will attend on site at Heston Elementary. For the Crosswind facility, we reached out to them, it's been, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, and didn't know for sure what their operations were like, and they haven't been operating since, I believe, February, and so felt like it might be a good time to reignite Crosswinds and bring some kids over there, and that's worked out really well, and they've been great to work with and very receptive, and we've taken over. I think as of today, we've pretty much taken over, and that is a facility that costs some money, and we were able to apply for, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, CARES Act money that goes for COVID response. And we felt like going into that, and we had to do it pretty quickly. It was a quick turnaround, but we felt like at that time the off-site hybrid model was something we wanted to pursue. So whenever we applied for that, we applied for rental fees and utility costs for off-site facility usage. And so that worked out really well for us. We're still going through the process to finalize that, but we're very confident that we'll be able to pay for the rental and utilities at those sites out of that COVID money. That's what it's for, and we're able to provide, again, on-site school for all of our K-8 students which I think is a big help, not only to us as we educate them, but also to our families as they go to work each day and those types of things too. So very much a community effort throughout that process.
We get a couple more questions. One is, will parents be informed if there is a positive COVID case in their student's class, or only if if their child's considered a close contact?
So that's something we'll work with the county on. I don't know the particulars of that, but if we have a positive case in our school, that's going to be the first call that we make, and we will communicate as much as we possibly can on that, and we will respond based on the guidance that we get from the county. So the procedures for communication, we will follow their guidelines and their guidance, and again, they are extremely responsive. They are on top of it. We've talked about what to do in those cases, and that'll be our very first call. So I don't know that I can answer that as to who exactly will be communicated with if we have a positive case, but we'll have good guidance on that.
Okay, and then what will band look like for the kids, especially during remote?
Well, I liked the first part of the question, then you added the, especially during remote. That makes it more complicated, but band will be just like other classes. We'll have a morning and afternoon group. It's not divided exactly 50-50. I could talk more about that with kind of the logistics of that, a morning and afternoon groups and the complications of that, but it does reduce the size and certainly allows them to spread out a greater amount in the spaces they have to work with, whether they use gyms or where they use the band room that's right back here behind us as well. So we've significantly reduced sizes for that. If we go remote, that's where those types of classes are really challenging. I don't want to speak for Mr. Graverson on every idea that he has with that right now, but you know, we were able to do some things with choir and band last spring. We want to be able to provide more, obviously, across the board with that, but there's some challenges in a course like that. But I know that Mr. Graverson has ideas of how he can continue to work with students on having them record pieces, send them to him, and he can provide feedback individually with kids too, and help those that definitely want to keep getting better with their instrument. Yep, would there be different for middle school?
I'm not sure if this is exactly what whoever wrote that question meant, but my mind went to just some safety considerations for band too, because band and choir, if you're kind of just paying attention, those are higher risk activities, you know, and we're just reading all about those things. And I can speak specifically to band. We've purchased some, basically they're instrument masks, for lack of a better phrase, for brass instruments. Kind of reduce some of the air that's coming out of those. And then Mr. Graverson's also going to use pads that absorb the spit from instruments too, to just kind of keep that a little bit more sanitary too. So band's been a little bit more, we kind of specialize some things that we're doing when it comes to band as well.
I don't know if it's been out to everybody yet, but Mr. Graverson, to speak specifically to band, did create a video. Did you know if that went out today? He's gonna get a video out and where he's demonstrating a lot of the different things that he's doing with band, and he does a great job. He's been on top of it from day one. So when that goes out, we encourage all of our band students and parents to watch that, and he goes through pretty thoroughly all the different things that they'll be doing, from how he's spacing out kids in the classroom to how you perform with different instruments. And if you don't know, does anybody know the highest risk instrument in band? Mrs. Lafferty. The flute. Who would have thought? Anyway, so he even speaks to the flute as far as some of the strategies that he wants to use there.
Okay, this next one was just about those procedures. If a child's not feeling well, what should parents do before should they bring them to school, or what procedures should parents follow if their child's not feeling well?
So Greg, I think, mentioned, or Mr. Heinrichs mentioned the fundamentals, and he talked about wearing masks, social distancing, hand hygiene or personal hygiene, and the fourth one is, if you're not feeling well, stay home. If you're sick, stay home. That's a big one. And that's something, as we've talked at these meetings, that we feel like it's important that we commit to. And I've always been guilty. If I'm not feeling that well, I get up, I go to work because I don't want to stay home all day. But at this point, I think everybody needs to commit, and I believe if we follow those fundamental practices, we're going to be in good shape, and we're going to continue to move in positive directions. So we would say, if you're not feeling well, that you should stay home.
Maybe in addition to that too, and I'm kind of thinking of, okay, so I'm a parent and I'm trying to make this decision, and then I'm calling the school and letting them know my kid is sick. With that, it's probably going to be, you're going to call and probably get Vanessa here at the high school. And just so we can be on the same page with where things are at, she might ask a couple more questions, about illness and what are we experiencing with that too, just so we can be in good communication with each other too, and know what's happening for a kid, and what are the next good steps going to be for that. And, that way we can be planning too for what to prepare for a student when they're not going to be at school. Because if they're going to be gone one day is a little bit different than, based on those, a 14-day quarantine is a little bit different than, I needed to be out one day for something too. And so we need to be able to have our teachers game plan for that too. So we want to just have good communication with folks with that. Yep.
Just to add, that was a very good point, Mr. Rhodes. But just to add to that, if a student, it's a little bit different this year in that if a student's not feeling well and cannot do work at home, that's perfectly fine, and that you call them in just like you always do. If they're not feeling well, but they still feel well enough to do some work, they can become a remote learner at that point. And that's something that we really haven't had available in the past, where students who are home, because they'll have had, if they're an on-site student, they'll have had class all the way up to that point, and there's probably things that they could do at home and still be counted as attending school. And we'll talk more about that. It's a little bit unusual, but I did, in a meeting that I attended today with KSDE, that was reiterated that just because a student is at home doesn't mean they can't be marked present. And so that's where that remote learning component is going to feel a little bit different. So if you're a high school student, and you know what you need to do that day, or you can communicate with your teacher, it's not just necessarily homework, but if you're able to continue on with the work from that class in a way that teacher expects, you could actually be present that day. And we'll kind of work through the details of that. I don't know how that will change anything, but it is something that the state has told us is an option for students. And especially like Mr. Rhodes said, if it's going to be for an extended period of time, if you're feeling well and you can do the work at home, but you have to stay home for 10 days or 14 days, that's where we'll definitely want to start logging the work that you're doing. And if you're a remote learner, whenever we give you that information, that tutorial information, we'll talk about how you are marked present by showing us the amount of time that you spent doing that school work during a given day. So we're learning more and more about remote learning. It's different. But as we go through the first part of the year, I think we'll have more good information on that.
So should a child be quarantined, we would want that parent to communicate that with us, and then we would work out the best plan in terms of if they're sick or
Yes.
if they can do work, right?
Correct, yes. And another thing, just to kind of connect back to the gating criteria, if you're quarantined, then that would be a COVID-related absence. And we're trying to keep track of that, so we know what is an absence that's unrelated, but what is a COVID-related absence, and quarantine would be an example of that. Yes. So the question is, and I've seen this in some other locations, some other schools, where the school is encouraging parents to transport their kids to sporting events. And should we encourage that so that we can have more space on a bus? And it's a great question and something that we could consider, but based on the guidance that we've received right now on transportation, we feel like the mitigation strategies that we have in place are good strategies. They include the way we load the bus, the way we spread kids out when we can, that we have hand sanitizer on the bus, and that we put windows down and circulate air on the bus. That we keep groups the same on the bus. If it's an activity, that might look a little different than the day-to-day transportation, but there would be assigned seating so we know which kids are sitting by one another. So right now, based on the guidance that we've received, and I think transportation, it's something on everybody's minds, and we want to be able to spread kids out as much as we can. We also want to seat kids if they've got a sibling. We'll seat the households together and those types of things. So there's a lot of different components of what we'll do on buses, and right now that's what the county's telling us we need to do. So we don't have plans to tell parents that you need to transport your child. We plan to do so on buses, but if that's something that you prefer, we can certainly talk about that.
I have a couple more that just came in, like for example, if students are doing remote learning, will they have to do it during the school hours, or can they do that in the evening?
They can do that anytime, including weekends. And that was something, again, in a meeting that I had today that was reiterated. It does not have to be at specific times. You know, something that we've talked a lot about, and a lot of districts are either doing or even requiring to some degree, and that is the potential to actually attend school remotely at the time the class is occurring. With Zoom and some of these other softwares, that potential exists, and we're not going to base our remote model on that, but there is the potential where that synchronous learning could take place to a degree. But outside of that, and again, when we get more information out on how you log time, we'll talk about what flexibility you have, but you can actually do that work at the time that works best for you. So.
And then the other one here is, will the school be able to provide COVID testing?
I don't think so. I will tell you, being on the CARES Act committee for the county, there is a good amount of money that is designated for expanded testing capacity. And that could include different sites across the county, but I don't think the school district would be one of those, but it could, based on, you know, availability of supplies and you know, the different things that go into testing, it could be somewhere in close proximity to the school potentially. So there's a long ways to go right now before we could get there, but you know, the possibility to have expanded testing hopefully will occur through some of those COVID relief dollars. Yes. Okay, I'm going to repeat that unless Nurse Tammy, you want to come up. So the question is about flu shots and the time frame on that, and that would be second week of October, and we'll get information out on that. Yes. So the question is, for those students who are on site, will we utilize Acellus on site, which is the online learning platform that will be utilized to a large degree by students who are remote? Will that be used on site so that students will know it when they potentially have to be home? And the answer is yes. That is something that they will learn while they're on site. And principals, I don't know if you want to expand on that a little further.
Yeah, so that's a thing that we're going to try to get knocked out really early on also, is get them their login information, get them in there. There's a very brief student tutorial. When I say brief, it's like a 5 or 10 minute thing just to get them comfortable with doing that. But I know we'll have some teachers at the high school level that might even use some of that content and material that's in Acellus with their kids that are here too. They certainly have the opportunity to do that. And it'll look different. Honestly, it's going to look different from content area to content area at the high school level, the amount of use with that, even with remote learners and on-site kids with that. because there's parts of it that maybe match better for our courses than others with that too. So there's some other resources too. It won't be just a SELLUS for remote learners. There'll be some other resources that our teachers at the high school level use as well.
Okay, I think we've exhausted our streaming group. Other questions here?
Yes. Oh, so that question was for remote learners, will the district provide computers and devices like we did last spring? Yes. So I'll just jump in real quick. The question was for students who have just seasonal allergies and are sneezing and coughing due to allergies, nothing more than that. How are the schools going to handle that? And Nurse Tammy said they'll be in communication with those families. Yes. So I keep forgetting. I was going to do better, but so that question was for middle school students. Are they going to be using lockers, or are they going to be allowed to just take their backpacks with them class to class? Yes and no, actually, on both of those. There are a few times, but we've limited it, but a few times when students are going to be able to visit their lockers. But yes, they'll just take their backpacks with lots of stuff from class to class. Yeah, that's a really good question. That question was, I think, especially specific to crosswinds, just security procedures and things like that. So we will follow the same basic kind of security measures that we have at the school. So our doors are locked. All the doors are locked except the front door. We're actually going to lock all of our doors there at Crosswinds. And Chief Schrader and I were in contact just yesterday, and he's going to increase some patrol routes over there and just have a little bit bigger presence through Crosswinds than maybe he would have with that. So they are very aware that we will have students out at Crosswinds, and we'll perform all the same safety drills, fire drills, tornado drills, that sort of thing. We'll do those out at Crosswinds too.
Yeah, so the question was, how are students going to get in the building? Are they just using one entrance or multiple entrances? We are going to use our main entrance here with that. Typically, we actually only have 2 of those doors unlocked in the morning. So they kind of funnel just through 2 doors. And then the next set of doors, there's only 2 doors that are unlocked. So we'll unlock that whole bank of them. I think with our student body divided in half, I'm thinking of the typical flow of traffic, when we have all 250 of them here. There's generally not one big mass all at once that's coming in. So I really think with 120 of them at a time, that still sounds like a big number. But as they're trickling in over potentially 20 minutes, we're not going to have big lumps of kids coming in. But we also, one of the factors in that is we're also still bound to take their temperatures as they enter the building. And so if we divide that up over too many entry points, that's a challenge. And also, as we open up too many doors for entry points at a high school, that goes to a security question that you asked too. We don't want to do that from a procedural standpoint either. Okay, so yeah, that's what we're going to do. And so we're going to have to kind of work through. Our first couple days are going to be a good indicator on how we have to adjust what we're thinking on flow of traffic with that. For folks that are in the building, if you walk out tonight, you'll see in the breezeway out there on the brick pillars, there's little white machines that students will be, as they walk in the door, they'll just walk up to that, they'll get that close, it'll read out their temperature. So we're not going to be holding things up to them too. So we've got some machines that we think are going to work pretty well for that. So Mr. Stoppel and I will probably spend a lot of time in the breezeway here as we start the school year with that too, monitoring the traffic in and out with that.
Like you're referring to kids who are at crosswinds? Okay, so good question. We still are going to use the, question was for students, 7th and 8th graders who are at crosswinds and maybe they have a doctor's appointment in the middle of a day or something like that. So how do we do that? So we are still going to use the regular Heston Middle School office and phone number, even though obviously we have students out at crosswinds. So if you need to make those arrangements, still call 327-7111. We, for a big chunk of the day, will have another secretary out at crosswinds, or Mrs. Taves or myself, and the secretary at the middle school site will let us know, and we'll have that message, and we will have that student, we'll go find where that student is, and we will have that student waiting and let you know, okay, we're in the conference room, or the conference building, or we're in the Maybe Center, and we'll let you know where that student's at, and we'll have them ready to go when you need to pick them up.
This is a question for the elementary. How will a student who is attending Heston Child Care before school get to the church in the orange criteria?
If your child is attending Kids Connect, typically they come up from that location about 7:45, and we would provide transportation to that location if we are off-site.
So I'll do my best to paraphrase the question, but I know where you're going with all that. So going back to the gating criteria, one of the questions that we've worked through and the question that came up here was the ability to distinguish between county numbers and zip code based numbers. And I can think of some people that I know who work in other school districts where they receive zip code data. They don't utilize county data. And for us in Harvey County, we have not been presented with that data. We've asked for it or asked if that would be a good way to go about analyzing, conditions in our community and our school. And right now, they've held firm that they believe we need to use county data. The other point that was made was just about that positivity rate component specifically. And recently, the CDC, they have made recommendations to not test asymptomatic people. So potentially, do you have, with a relatively small number of testing that we do already in Harvey County, if we're not testing everybody or we're not testing asymptomatic people, do we potentially see the numbers of positives go up much more than they otherwise would have, because the people who are being tested for a reason. Maybe they have symptoms or they're close contacts and those types of things. So we're going to continue to ask that question of where the relevance of the county versus the community comes into play. But it's also why we want to make sure that we interpret the data and that we don't make decisions based on fluctuations without really digging into it. And so I think that part's really important, that we don't make decisions too quickly, that we look at it through a number of different lenses as well. So, and I think you made one more point that I think I missed maybe. I got it? Okay.
You bet. The question was, thanks, Courtney. Question was for after-school program. If you're not familiar with that, students who need just a little extra time, a little extra help to finish up some homework from that day, they meet in our library, and that's supervised, and it's just a really good thing. And so we will still have that. So students coming back, it'll be at the middle school site. So even 7th and 8th graders who are going to that when they get dropped off, they'll just walk to the library, and of course 5th and 6th graders are already there. So we will have that essentially as normal. And the library gives us a big space to really spread kids out, in there too.
I do remember the other point, and that was if we have outbreaks or large numbers that are isolated in a given location, like a college, if a college has a number of positive cases, do we automatically utilize, again, countywide data where those may be contained or may not have, and it doesn't have to be just a college, but it may not directly impact us? And again, that's another reason, it's a great point, another reason why we really need to dig into that data. So. Yeah, the positivity rate has definitely been impacted by some of those, what we would consider outbreaks and those types of things. Any other questions? Darla, are there anything else? Okay, other questions here? Yes.
Okay, so I'll try to paraphrase again your question. Tell me if I get the essence of it here, but just concerned for, the instructional time is going to be significantly less. Less access than physically access to the teacher. Concern for the frustration of kids. Concern for mental health of kids along with that. And then adding in maybe extra time outside of class to do some work with that too. I hear you on all those things. Number one, I ask myself a lot of questions every day on a lot of things related to that. So, I think part of it is, they're not going to be here as much. There's going to be some kids who are going to have to utilize their time. If, let's say, they're an afternoon student, they're going to have to utilize their morning time perhaps to do some work, and that's going to be true. I don't think, when I said, there is the expectation of 6.5 hours of work, that's impossible to calibrate from kid to kid. It might take me 2 hours to do an assignment that took you 10 minutes. You know, and so what I've talked about with our teachers too is let's don't try to worry about the time component with that, but like what's the actual work they need to do and what's the quality that we're talking about. The other thing that I think can be an advantage for us though with that missing that instructional time and then frustration with kids, and I've had this conversation with several of our teachers, is a lot of those kids are going to come in and be in really small groups when they come in right now, in those morning and afternoon groups. Most of the time are going to be in single digit groups with teachers, and there's going to be some exceptions to that. But even our biggest regular classroom groups are going to be around a dozen, and that's the biggest group, okay, as we've divided those up. There might have been an exception with a 13 somewhere, but as a general rule, going to be small. And so I think teachers feel pretty encouraged from that point of, okay, I'm going to see kids less, but I might have actually more time with me and you for feedback and working through some challenges with me and you, and this small group. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how some of that can balance out too. And honestly, we're going to have to learn some things the first couple weeks as we are distributing work out to kids, and how's that going? You know, we have a school improvement day. Is it September 21? So we do a couple weeks of school, and we saved we moved all these school improvement days up front so teachers could get ready to teach, and we saved that one, and that's going to be a big time for us to go, okay, we've done a couple weeks, what's going really well and what do we need to change? Because there's going to be some things that we need to change, and there's going to be hopefully some things that's going pretty well with that, and that's going to be a really big topic on that of what's that flow for kids with that too. Because hopefully we continue with activities too, and kids are busy in the evenings. I mean, that would be my hope, you know, with that too, and I think that's an important part of their high school education and opportunities with that. And before anybody gets me wrong on that, I'm not even talking about sports. It's sports, but it's art club, and it's band, and it's the musical, and it's all those things that kids need to be a part of, and so that's also a part of why we want every kid every day at school, because when they start feeling that frustration and we lose the contact, that frustration is going to build the more time we're away from them, and that's why I think it's really, 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 really important we got them here every day, too. So, yeah. Yeah, so the question was if and when, right, we get back to the green zone, are some of these same procedures going to be in place with spacing and mask? And the answer to that is yes. I wish I knew when that point in time will be when we're told that we don't have to worry about those things, but none of us have any indication of when we're going to get to be told that as a school. But even in the green, everything I talked about, and same thing with middle school and elementary school, everything we talked about with masks would still apply. The difference would be our class sizes would be a little bit bigger at that point, and we'll utilize some spaces maybe a little bit different. But you know, with the smaller groups, we'll be able to space them out a little bit more. Bigger groups come in, they'll be a little bit closer. But hopefully at that point we have the indications that we can do that. That's why we go back to green at that point. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you there. Yeah. Okay. So will we have the room to keep kids spaced out? Yeah. So it'll still be. We're not going to sit them in table groups. They'll still be separated desks and that kind of stuff too. Same stuff. Yeah. Certainly, some of our classes are. If you've ever been back in our classrooms, it's weird back there. You know, some are bigger and some are smaller. So we're going to have to work through some of the logistics of that too when we're in a green mode too.
So the question is, if the mask mandate changes, would it potentially change for school? And, you know, I've talked about before the challenge of masks, right? We've talked about that a lot as a staff. We know that that's a challenge, and both just, you know, for a lot of our young ones and wearing them, and just the the dynamic, the environment that changes with them on. We are going to stay reliant on our county. I can tell you that. We built a good relationship with them. I've mentioned over the course, we've had many of these meetings, and I've mentioned over the course of time how I've had to get in the mindset that it's good to do. And I know you can read different studies that say different things, and I get that. My stance on that has been just try to keep it simple, that if it's going to allow us to do the things that we want to do, if it's going to allow us to bring kids to school every day, then let's commit to doing it until we don't have to anymore. And I will, that'll be a great, great day. Now I'm looking forward to that day. And when it comes, you know, we'll be ready to make that change, or when that recommendation comes, we'll be ready to make that change. But until then, we want to be on the safe side, and it's going to allow us to, you know, to provide school, provide the activities, because that's why you see in orange, we're in school, and activities will still go. Because we believe if we can be in school, that we can provide safety in those activities as well. And if this helps with that, let's do it, because we want our kids around our teachers, and we want our kids around our coaches, and we want to see them every day. So that's my response right now. I know it's a tough issue. I know it's tough for a lot of people. I think we can do it for a while, and when it's time to take them off, let's do that too. Other questions? Mr. Woodward.
So I mentioned 5th and 6th grade will stay on site, but as we move 7th and 8th grade off site, it just opens up the entire middle school and lets 5th and 6th graders access some spaces that maybe they would have kind of been battling 7th and 8th graders for. So we will have, we're going to use the stage at times. That's a big space, and now it has tables and chairs on it. Again, if you're familiar with the middle school layout, the choir room is a bigger space, and there'll be some students in there. The art room is a bigger space. I could go on. There's 4 or 5, 6 bigger spaces that our 5th and 6th graders are going to use for their core classes. Encore classes already use some of those bigger spaces, or they are some smaller class sizes, so a regular size class still kind of works for them. So good question, whoever asked that, Mr. Woodward. So yeah, 5th and 6th grade is going to really spread out all over the middle school.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we will call that an evening. And just again, want to say how much we appreciate you for engaging with us. There will be more information that comes out next week. I know that we have activities that are starting, and Mr. Stoppel will be sharing specific information on how those will work as far as spectators and those types of things. So we'll get all that information out to you next week. Remote learning will be another topic that we'll send out information on. If you have questions in the meantime, you know, make sure you go to our plan. It's long. It's 88 pages. But there's a lot of information if you just take a little bit of time to digest some of that. I think it can be helpful, but please do not hesitate to reach out to us, our team, anytime, and that's why we're here. So appreciate everybody this evening. Thank you very much.